Do you feel that your life is passing you by as you rush through one day after another? I found that many people feel as if they are barely living. They wake up, work, eat, and sleep, a humdrum cycle that is repeated joylessly day after day. And if you add pressure, stress, anxiety, and more stress into the mix, life can feel purposeless and overwhelming. But hope is on the way. Research shows that you can create new, uplifting cycles that foster well being simply by noticing life's little joys. Join me and mental health expert Deb Dana, licensed clinical social worker, for a deep dive into the gentle power of glimmers.
Welcome to Imperfect Love with Dr. Carla Marie Manley, psychologist, author, and relationship expert. I'm here to help unravel mysteries and misconceptions about love, relationships, and mental health issues, plus everything in between. Love is complicated, people are not perfect, and relationships surely can be tough. Together, we'll navigate this messy, imperfect space of real life.
Today, we'll focus on this listener's real-life question. My latest review at work has left me feeling really down and more anxious than ever. Basically, my boss says I'm not doing enough, even though I barely have a life outside work. I'm not in a relationship and have few friends because I have social anxiety. I'm in a bad loop and can't get out. Do you have any ideas for me? And with that question as the focus of today's episode, I'm Dr. Carla Marie Manley, and this is Imperfect Love. Please note, as this episode contains sensitive information, listener discretion is advised. If you need support, please see the special links in the show notes. Today, I am joined by a very wonderful guest, Deb Dana, LCSW, licensed clinical social worker, who will be sharing her expertise on glimmers, the polyvagal theory, internal family systems, and so much more. Deb is a consultant, an author, a psychotherapist, and the individual who coined the term that may be new to you, glimmers. Welcome to the podcast, Deb. It is such a joy to have you with us today.
It is really fun to be here, and I think we're going to have a lovely conversation. I'm looking forward to it.
Me too. Thank you for gracing us with your presence. Before we get into the heart of today's topic, would you tell our listeners just a little bit about what makes you, you?
What makes me me? That's such a fun question, isn't it? To think about what makes me me. I think the things that I love about my life in this moment is I'm a grandma. I have these great grandkids that hang around, that come in and out of my daily world, and it brings great joy to my life, so that I'm not just working, which I think is, if you'd asked me this question 5 years ago, what makes me me would be very different. I, was working all the time and caregiving for my husband, and the world felt very like it was closing in on me, right? So I kind of relate to that, the reader's question around feeling purposeless, joyless, right? So it's been lovely to find a way through that. And I think now what makes me me, I love those two words, joy and purpose, right? That I've rediscovered tiny moments of joy, and I'm beginning to frame my purpose differently. It's a stage of life for me too, right? I'll be 72 this year, and so it's a phase of life that is, what do I want to what do I want to do? What do I not want to do? I feel more freedom in making those decisions. So I suppose what makes me me is all of that, being able to say yes, no, and not feel so weighed down by the I don't know, by all the daily things that make up a life, and when you are in that stage of building, it feels very different than the stage I'm in right now. I feel like I'm in the stage of beginning to put out there into the world what I want and let go of what I don't. So a long roundabout way of exploring what makes me me, but I think all of that is it. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. And it's so interesting. As a clinician myself, I often see in images and feel things in my body as someone's talking. And as you were talking, I was feeling this oppressiveness.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
were describing your prior 5 years, this
Yeah.
darkness, this oppressiveness, and then this lightness of being, just beautiful lightness and freedom, and like a flower, coming out of the ground and saying, "Here I am, I'm shining.
I like that. Yes, here I am. Here I
Here
am.
I
Yeah.
am."
Yeah. It's interesting to reach that place, to be able to really feel okay to just say, here I am. Right. And I think that's, part of all this work that I've done, all this, nervous system experience and bringing it to life in these ways. And, maybe it has, I'm at a point now where I can say, here I am, right? Without getting, you know, without feeling a need to do any more than that. I liked it when you said, here I am, here I am. That's it. Here
Here
I
I
am.
am.
Yep.
And yet, I would be remiss if I didn't say, listeners, we have a world-renowned expert with us today who is as demure as you're being about it, as humble as you are being about it. You really have played a seminal role in polyvagal theory, of course, in Glimmers, which is not to be underestimated. Listeners, if you are not looking at this on YouTube, I'm just holding up for a minute because I'm going to do it later again. Deb Dana's book, it's called The Glimmers Journal. And talk about lightness of being. This book, it's beautiful. I mean, it's beautiful to touch, beautiful to hold. The cover literally sparkles with stars in the sky. I just love it. So, yes, you are bringing us so much richness today. So, behind that lovely, humble grandma facade is a wealth of life's work and
Thank you.
experience.
Thank you.
So, before we actually talk about the listener's question, for someone who doesn't know what we're talking about when we say polyvagal theory, could you, and listeners, don't worry, I'll have plentiful links in the show notes so you can find some easy articles to read on it or some complex articles. So, could you explain that to us, please?
Yeah, polyvagal theory was developed by my dear friend and colleague Stephen Porges, who brilliantly brought the nervous system to life in a new way. He described how the nervous system functions to keep us safe. It's the nervous system's job is really moment to moment to take action to make sure we're surviving, right? And polyvagal theory really, we talk about three principles that are important to know. A little bit different vocabulary, so bear with me. But the first principle is neuroception, and that's a word that Steve coined, because the nervous system doesn't use the thinking power of the brain, right? It's beneath the brain, and so there wasn't a word that could describe how the nervous system took in information. So he created the word neuroception, and I think it's a beautiful word. I love to say it. I think it brings to life what it is. It's a nervous system way of perception, right? And neuroception is always listening through three pathways. It's listening inside your body. So in this moment, if everybody just stops and takes the temperature of your body, that's neuroception, feeling your digestion, your heart, your lungs, your breath, your aches, your pains, your places of openness and warmth, right? That's your nervous system checking it out. The second is environmental. So the same we can do is just take a scan of the environment you're in, right? I'm looking at your environment, and your environment sends me a lot of cues of safety. It feels very welcoming. So my neuroception is one of, oh, I like that. That feels safe, right? And then the third pathway is the between. So, but from nervous system to nervous system. So your nervous system and mine are getting to know each other, right? We don't know each other. And yet we're getting all these cues that, and again, I'll speak for my nervous system. Your system feels very safe and as if I could trust it. Right. And so that lets me lean in and think, oh, we're going to have a lovely conversation. Right. So there are a lot of welcomes coming from neuroception to me in this moment. Right. And that can be the case, or it can be the case that we're getting warnings. And when we get warnings, we then move back a bit. Right. So neuroception's the first principle. Neuroception then takes us to the second principle, which is the hierarchy. And this is where we encounter glimmers and we encounter survival states. So the hierarchy that Steve identified is 3 states that we travel through in a predictable order. And that makes it wonderful for the practice of therapy, knowing where clients are and how to help them come back to safety and connection. But it's also great just for curious humans. Right. As I move through my day, I get to know, ooh, I'm feeling, neuroception of safety. I'm feeling anchored in regulation. Or, ooh, now I'm feeling a bit uneasy and I'm moving out of regulation into dysregulation. So we have 2 survival states. We have the sympathetic fight and flight that most people recognize, right? Most people know fight and flight. It's that anger, frustration, or anxiety panic pathway. And that's your nervous system saying it feels dangerous. I'm going to move you into fight and flight so that you can survive, right? So the other survival state that Steve brilliantly described for us, he discovered and described, is the shutdown, collapse, disconnect pathway. We call it dorsal vagal for people who want the scientific term, right? We can also just call it the pathway of shutdown, collapse, right? Which is the opposite sort of the sympathetic fight and flight. In sympathetic, we're flooded with energy. Can't sit still, can't move. I mean, can't sit still, have to move, are always, looking around, hypervigilant, flood of energy, chaotic, disorganized. In dorsal collapse, all of that goes away. All the energy drains from your system, and then you're left with sort of this give up, hopeless, why bother, despair, right? And even though it's hard to think of, this again is your nervous system protecting you, keeping you safe. Right. So in that place of collapse, the nervous system thinks it would be too dangerous to be big and to be out there in fight and flight. So I'm taking you to disappear, collapse. You can fly under the radar, and then you can live to come back to life another day. So there's always a adaptive reason that we move into these survival states. So then that takes us to the top of the hierarchy. When we are feeling safe enough, organized enough, when our neuroception brings us cues of welcome, then we come to the top of the hierarchy, and that's the ventral vagal, or, I often call it the land of okayness, right? Because it can be a place where we feel, sort of bliss or zen or at ease and calm, but it also can be a place where we feel happy and joyful and passionate and playful and all of these energized things. So it's a place where the life is okay enough, safe enough, right? And this is the place where glimmers live. Glimmers live in this state of safety and connection. Right. And glimmers, as we move into talking about them, glimmers are the easy to reach for, the easy to recognize moments of ventral, moments of feeling life is okay, I'm safe in this moment. So the third organizing principle, I don't want to forget it, and I shouldn't, but I could, is co-regulation. Right. So we really could have started with that because we're doing it together right now. But co-regulation is a biological need of our nervous system. We need to have others, safe others in our lives in order, first of all, to survive when we're born. We can't survive without other humans. And then to thrive through the the fullness of our life, we need other people. Maybe I only need one or two. Maybe I need 8 or 9. It depends on my system, but we need others in order to be in that place of connection, reciprocity, co-regulation.
Thank you for that really beautiful outline of a very complex theory. It's very complex, yet if we go to the nut of it, to that, the inside, we can really see that it is about being safe in the world.
Yeah.
And our
Yeah,
system does what our system needs to do to feel safe.
exactly.
Sadly, for people who have had trauma in their lives,
Hmm.
their present, even if the present is safe,
Hmm.
they often believe it's not safe because they're
Right.
being informed
Right.
by a body, mind, and spirit
Hmm.
that remember and
Exactly.
never worked through
Yeah.
the trauma, which is why,
Yeah.
listeners, if you had trauma as a child, if you had parents who were aggressive, an alcoholic parent, anything like that, and there's not really anything identifiable in your current world, or you find yourself being hyper vigilant and hyper reactive, even when people are generally safe around you,
Hmm.
or when someone is safe and you perceive them as threatening, even when they're not being threatening,
Hmm. Yeah.
then we
Yeah.
know that that's your system. I'm sorry,
Yeah. No,
please.
no, I was just going to say that that's a familiar cue from the past in some way that's come alive in the present, right? So you may be perfectly safe, but you may move in a certain way. That is a familiar reminder from the past. Or you may use a word, or you may wear a color, or you may have something in your environment, right? And that's the way the nervous system, is always on guard trying to keep us safe. And it can make no sense whatsoever to our brains, but on a nervous system level, makes perfect sense.
Absolutely. And that's where that gift of self understanding, self compassion comes in. And I'm thinking of couples when I'm working with couples. One will be saying, but he said this, they said this, whatever it is, she said this. And the person's saying, you know, I really, or I'm observing and seeing that the person's really in a fairly neutral state.
Yeah.
And yet their brain and their body is being informed from something in the past. It could be a parent, it could be a former relationship. And they're saying, but it's you, it's you. And the person's saying, but I didn't do anything. And
Right.
sometimes that really, really is true.
Yes.
And so the work is to not judge it, just to get to the roots of it.
Yeah, it's that beautiful, experience of can I be curious? Right. And we can only be curious if we have some of that regulating ventral energy active and alive in our system. Right. It is, we call that an emergent property. It is a quality of being in that place of ventral or having enough ventral available so that I can be curious. When I am in survival, either sympathetic or dorsal, fight, flight, or collapse, I am biologically unable to be curious. Right? It's not that I don't want to be, but I'm biologically unable. It does not go with survival.
Absolutely. And for our listeners, when Deb is explaining this, you may have also heard of these concepts as fight, flight, freeze, appease. And that freeze, appease, we've seen animals, a
Mhm.
scared dog, a scared puppy dog, some animal go into a corner and either go with their, belly up, like, please don't hurt me, or freeze and play possum, like,
Mhm.
I'm dead, don't bother me, it's
Right.
okay. And so we see this in the animal kingdom frequently,
Yeah.
and we too are animals, and we have the same drive
Right.
inside,
Right. Yeah.
all intended to keep us alive, even if they don't necessarily work for our benefit.
Right. I like to think the very first time that survival state came alive, it was necessary.
Mm.
Right. Maybe now, all these years later, and I will admit, as every human, I still end up in messy survival states when it's not necessary because my nervous system, remembers a cue from the past, and there I go. I'm much better now at recognizing and going, oh, wait a minute. and I can ask a discernment question. My discernment question that I, ask, and I invite people to ask when you can recognize is, in this moment, in this place, with the people I'm around, if I'm around people, is this response needed? Right? That's the discernment question. Not is it appropriate, because that's not a nervous system experience, but is it needed?
Is
And
it,
oftentimes the answer I get is, that intensity of response is not needed in this moment. Right?
again, beautifully said and so humble? And I agree with you. There are times in all of us, especially anyone who's had a modicum of trauma, much less intense trauma.
Yeah.
There are times you catch yourself reacting and your heart's beating and you're anxious, or you feel yourself getting brewing for a fight. And it's, wait a minute, as you said,
Yeah.
is that necessary now?
Yeah.
And that's the gift of curiosity,
Right.
being able to
Right.
be curious with yourself.
Yeah.
Is this helping me now?
Right. Right.
It may
Right.
have helped me when I was 5 or
Yes.
15 or 20, but is it helping me now? And
Right.
being
Right.
curious in general. So
Yes.
thank you for all of this beautiful background information. We look at the listener's question, and I too really feel for this individual who I can only imagine, giving everything you have to work, having the boss give you a bad review,
Mhm.
feeling as though you're giving it everything. It's the only,
Mhm.
you're funneling all this energy into this, what you think is a safe place, your work, and being told you're not giving enough. And then on the other side, because it seems like there are at least two pieces here where the individual's saying, and I have social anxiety. I
Oh,
don't have friends. I,
yeah.
and I'm leaning into the question, I'm doing some interpretation, but it's almost as if I'm giving so much because I don't have anything else. And now
Hmm.
I'm being told that everything
Hmm.
I'm giving is not good enough. And I was anxious before, and now I'm super anxious because what's wrong with me?
Yeah. Right. Right. Yeah, I can feel for that person too, and that anxiety that is driven by the sympathetic need, right? There's a drivenness in back of that energy. Have to, should, right? Those are sympathetic experiences. And then what often happens is we're in that place of have to, should, and we're pushed and pushed, where we're always seeking, but we never can be satisfied. And then oftentimes what happens is we then move into that dorsal collapse despair, right? Because the system can only stay in that driven, anxious place so long. And then it takes a break, so to speak. So collapse rescues you from anxiety. It doesn't nourish you in any way, but it gets you out of that overwhelming anxiety. But then you're in despair, hopeless collapse. And that cycle is something that we see often, right? And again, it's not an uncommon cycle for humans to be in. So if maybe your listener who sent in the question might feel not so alone. Not It's not an unusual cycle. Painful, and you suffer in it, but it's not unusual to be in that. If sometimes it helps to know, oh, I am one of many in this experience. It's not just me. So we'll add that in. And it's interesting because, when we're working with clients, we often say, I can't change what happened to you. I can't change what is happening to you, but I can help you have a different relationship with it. Right. That's really the gift of therapy. That is the gift of the nervous system. Right. I can help you find moments of safety and connection and regulation. And the more moments we can dip into that, then you're going to find options. You're going to hear different stories. You're going to feel as though you can do things differently. But when you're stuck in anxiety and despair, you don't have access to options or hearing different stories or possibilities. You are simply stuck in the survival mode. Right. So, one of the ways we think about helping people is saying, can we find those tiny moments of okayness. And that's really where Glimmers came from in my work with complex trauma survivors, who we spend so much time working with what we call triggers, right? What are the things that dysregulate you, that feel dangerous to you? And yet the nervous system tells us very clearly, yes, we need to reduce and resolve those things, but we also have to actively experience moments of okayness in order for change to happen. You can't simply focus on changing the work, changing the home, changing those things. You also have to actively experience this ventral state. And that's where Glimmers first came from, years ago with my clients. It was like, what's a word that felt within reach, that didn't feel so big that they would say, I can never do that, right? Because that's a common response when we're feeling stuck in survival. Can't possibly do any of those other things. So what was a word? And I tried Glimmers, because to me, Glimmers feels like what it is, right? A tiny thing that has a bit of a sparkle and brings just a tiny moment of feeling I'm not stuck in the suffering. And my clients liked the word, and we started exploring, how do you find a glimmer in a trauma saturated environment? And that's really where we started.
So your term glimmers, which I absolutely love, it has its roots in your work with complex trauma.
Yeah.
And we can see that it certainly helps somebody who's mired in trauma,
Yeah.
depression, anxiety. And as people have embraced the term, it's very clear that it helps everyday life. That
Exactly.
if we
Yeah.
pause to really notice a glimmer,
Yes.
state either out loud or to the self, this is a glimmer. I see
Mhm.
that hummingbird. That's a
Yes.
glimmer. Right?
Yes.
I watched this, beautiful mother and child hug glimmer.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah.
My partner came home and smiled, glimmer. I
Hmm.
hugged my puppy dog, glimmer.
Hmm.
I tasted something I made. Oh, it tastes so good.
Ah,
Glimmer.
yes. Yeah.
I have
Yeah.
this familiar taste, in my mouth every time I make my mom's, sauce recipe,
Hmm.
special sauce, glimmer.
Yeah.
So if we really slow things down,
Yeah.
we can see
Yeah.
the glimmers are there for all
Yes.
of us.
Yes. Glimmers are all around us. And as we, move into thinking about how we find glimmers and look for glimmers, we also want to just recognize that finding glimmers is not a form of toxic positivity, because that's going around in our world. It's like, oh, just don't focus on the bad things, just look for the good and everything will be fine, right? And so we want to make sure we remember that is not a glimmer practice. Glimmers are a way that we can recognize that our nervous system is exquisitely able to hold the suffering and see the glimmers, right? And in fact, the more we find glimmers, the more capacity we have to work with the suffering. So that's the benefit for every human in looking for glimmers. It gives you more capacity to be with the suffering, the hard things, the challenges, and navigate the world in a different way. So I just wanted to say that so that we
Thank you for
remember that.
differentiating and the way adding on to your thoughts on toxic positivity, I see toxic positivity as also putting on this mask with a smiley face,
Yeah.
that you just feel stuck behind this mask of artificiality.
Mm,
Whereas if you're sad and you're out on a walk and you're sad or you're even crying, I think of when my mom died and I was crying everywhere. But I could still see and witness,
yeah.
a rose. And that reminds me of mama.
Yeah.
And I could still see somebody, that I loved with a smile and go, thank you for the smile. I could
Yeah.
still receive a hug and feel that warmth. And some people are so deep in the depths of despair that they feel like they're betraying
Yeah. Yeah.
someone or even themselves
Yeah.
by feeling a glimmer. But I believe that's why there's the old phrase, glimmer of hope,
Yes.
because glimmers do give us hope.
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
are those little resets that remind us life is worth living. Even if your boss was cruel,
Mm-hmm.
didn't see how much you give,
Mm-hmm.
there are glimmers around you.
Yeah.
Maybe you don't have, I'm speaking now to the listener's
Yeah.
question, maybe this individual doesn't have friends or family reflecting back and
Mm-hmm.
giving them things to feel positive about. Yet, in this person's life, there are ways to create glimmers. And I also like how you said, because this individual said they barely have friends or don't have friends or many friends because of social anxiety. I often think that sometimes when we have this idea, and you said it so beautifully, some people only need one or two friends.
Yep.
Some feel incomplete unless they have, a list of 20 friends or 30 friends. Me, I don't have a high capacity to maintain a lot of
Yep.
relationship. And research shows that most of us have the capacity to get, maintain about 5 relationships at a time,
Right.
intimate ones. And so we can see that this person may also be feeling somewhat stuck and hurting because
Yeah.
something in them might be saying you should
Right.
have all these friends and you should be going out and doing all of these social things. And
Mm-hmm.
as you wisely said, anytime we're hearing that should voice, we are triggering
Mm-hmm.
that sympathetic nervous system that's saying, you're doing something wrong. You better
Mm-hmm.
get ready to fight or flee.
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and I think part of this work in befriending your nervous system is to know that there's no one way, right? There's no right or wrong way. There's the way that your nervous system says works for you, right? And I like remembering that there's the way of my nervous system, right? And I think oftentimes you're right. We get messages from out there, that say you should do this or you shouldn't do that, or you need this or not that. And if you run that through your nervous system and say, how does your nervous system respond? Right? Like you, my nervous system says, yeah, 10 friends is nope, nope, not that's overwhelm. Give me 2 or 3 who I can count on and my nervous system feels nourished. So the question, really is what nourishes your nervous system, right? And even with glimmers, there is not a glimmer that nourishes every nervous system. Every nervous system is going to find the glimmers that feel nourishing to it, right? Nature's fairly predictably, bringing of glimmers, but what kind of nature? What place in nature? Right? I'm an ocean person, so I know the ocean's going to bring me glimmers. Other people, not ocean at all. They're desert people, so it's interesting, is it, to know each nervous system is going to find glimmers in different places.
Absolutely. And going back to your book, the cover is I too am ocean, but I must say, I'll take river, I'll take desert, I'll take mountains. Just give me nature, please,
Mhm.
please, nature.
Yeah.
And I want to pause, if you don't mind. Listeners, these are just 2 bits from Deb's book so that you can get a better idea of what we're talking about. It's a journal and she offers prompts. And there are 2 that they're all poignant, but 2 that especially spoke to me. One is touch the earth, directly connecting to the earth, sometimes called earthing or grounding, helps regulate our physiology. We benefit from connection to the earth's natural electric charge. Walk barefoot, dig in the dirt, put your hands in the sand, touch the grass, unearth your glimmers. And then there's just plenty, abundant space to write. And that really speaks to what you said, that for some of us, going out and gardening, for me, gardening is like a dream. For someone else, it's like, no, I don't want to do that. It's messy. And
Hmm.
they may prefer to water a potted plant
Right.
or to go hug a tree or to look at nature pictures in a clean
Exactly.
environment.
Exactly. Yep.
Whatever it might be, as you say, it's all unique. And if it feels nourishing, I'm leaning into your word nourishing because it is a really beautiful way of putting it. What nourishes one person may not nourish another.
Right.
And
Yeah.
you're right. When we get away from I should or I need to be nourished by this or that, no, it's what nourishes you.
Mhm.
And
Mm.
we're not talking, boxes of cookies here.
Yeah.
We're
Right.
talking about things that feel nourishing to your soul.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because as you talk about, gardening and digging in the dirt, I can feel it come alive in me. And it might not be my preferred way to find a glimmer, but my system can feel the joy that you have, and it comes alive in me. That's the joy of sharing glimmers, right? Of finding glimmer buddies or creating glimmer groups, or even just posting a glimmer. People post their glimmers all the time. People they email me their glimmers, and I feel my system come alive just reading them, right? And that's a nervous system experience. That's what we know happens when I'm, connected. It's that co-regulation again. When I'm connected to your ventral experience, my system can tend to join you in that, benefits my system as well.
Absolutely. And it can work the other direction. It can
Yep.
work where I know sometimes if I'm working with a client and they're feeling really sad, that sadness,
Yeah.
I can feel it literally in my body, in my soul. And
Yeah.
we all have been, I would imagine, in a party or an environment where somebody comes in and they're either really supremely happy and we catch that energy, or
Mhm.
they're supremely angry and we
Mm.
feel that energy.
Mm.
And so I
Yeah.
think that that's really important to realize that glimmers can be shared. I also thought, as you were talking, because we paused for a minute on the gardening, I think glimmers shift. I think that, there are times that sometimes I'm super excited to go out and garden.
Yeah.
And other times I'm like, not today.
Not today. Right.
Because and there could be a temptation to say, well, what's wrong with me? I usually like to garden.
Mhm.
Or I know when I'm ready to go out and walk in the rain, because I love being in the rain. I love walking in
Mm.
the rain. And my husband will be, don't do that. You'll catch your death of cold kind of thing.
Right.
And I'm like, oh, no, no, no. It feels good to me. But getting him to walk in the rain with me, it's not a glimmer for him.
Right. Exactly.
Anyway, so we all have
Yeah.
our
Yeah.
own. I'd like to do just one more bit from your book, if you
Sure.
don't mind. It's the
Yeah.
other one. Listeners, this one's really special because it invites us to turn to our past. We often look at the past through a lens of regret or sorrow, or I should have, or they should have. But Deb invites us to look to the past for glimmers. And here's an excerpt from her journal book. Relive and remember. Reminiscing is a pathway to regulation. When we remember moments that were glimmer filled, we return to them and feel them come alive again. Create a photo collage of people who bring you joy. Share a memory with a friend. Return to a special place. Start a family and friends memory book. Collect your glimmer memories. And I thought that was so special because for many people, especially if there's trauma in the past or relational issues, there's a tendency to do anything but look at the glimmers.
Yeah.
There's a tendency to go through and this was wrong, this was bad, this was bad. Yet, if we pause and say, oh, but my dad sang me songs, or I remember one time my mom cuddled me, even if there's only one time, right?
Mhm.
I
Mhm.
remember making
Yeah.
ice cream.
Yeah. Yeah.
I remember holding hands with my sister.
Yeah. Yeah.
Anything like that, where yes, there is, and neither Deb nor I are saying to do. We're not saying don't address the trauma, don't
No.
address the pain, but we are saying balance. If
Mhm.
there are glimmers that you can lean into,
Mhm.
whether from yesterday or 5 years ago or 20 years ago,
Yeah.
find them and nourish your nervous system with those
Yeah.
glimmers.
Yeah. I love what you're saying, that this scientific foundation that tells us that the nervous system can do that both and, right? And when I talk to my clients, to really say your biology is set up to do this beautiful both and, then somehow it became okay, right? And they'd have a tiny sliver of a glimmer memory. Beautiful, because really what the nervous system uses to create change are micro moments, right? It's not these great big, moments that happen that we have to stay anchored in for a long time to shape new patterns of connection, right? It's tiny moments, it's micro moments. And I often, ask people, so if it's micro moments that will create the change you're looking for, how does that change how you're living your life? How does that change what you're doing? Knowing that it's the micro moments that are important.
I think that's so special and so important. And taking it to our listeners' question, when they're struggling with this issue at work, it might, how would you, or ask them, what would you
Yeah.
offer them?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because this, your listener sounds overwhelmed. Her system feels overwhelmed, right? And when our system is overwhelmed, all of that information gets fed up to our brain, and our brain has to make up a story to make some sense of what's going on in the nervous system. And the stories that are going to emerge are stories of being helpless or stuck or trapped or not appreciated, all of these things, because those are the only stories that the brain can have access to when we're in survival. So, I suppose part of what I would do would be to explore with this listener, are there any tiny moments that feel different from that? Right. And we're looking for the glimmers, but in the beginning, we can just say a moment that doesn't feel like that isn't so intensely, mired in suffering, to a little bit different. So we're looking at something that's a little different. Right. And if we think about the nervous system, when you're in collapse, that's the path of last resort. When you move up into anger or anxiety, you're mobilizing. That's a system that's trying to come back to life. So we as silly as it seems, we celebrate the anger, we celebrate the anxiety, because it says your system is trying to move to regulation. It's moved up the hierarchy, right? And sometimes just appreciating, oh, I've gotten out of collapse. I'm now in mobilization. I'm on my way to a bit of regulation. And when we're in that mobilized place, can we notice a tiny moment that feels different? That, I think, is where we start. We look for something that's different, and we look for a tiny moment, because usually we're going to find it, right? And once we find it, we organically want to look for more.
Absolutely, kind of the treasure hunt, I'm hearing you say. And so for this individual, it might be like a glimmer of something kind a coworker said.
Yeah.
Could be an internal glimmer
Yeah.
of a job that they know is well done,
Yeah.
even if
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
boss isn't being kind and mindful. And
Mm,
it may also be glimmers from friendships.
mm,
It may be glimmers in their home environment.
mhm,
But
mhm,
what I hear you saying is neurobiologically, as this individual wires their brain to seeing and noticing more glimmers,
mhm.
doesn't have to be 25 glimmers a day. There's no
Nope.
goal there. It can be
Right.
one glimmer, like, oh,
Right. Right.
I love this
Yeah.
smell. For me, every time I use this certain, oil, my brain goes,
There you go. Yep.
so good. That's,
Yeah.
or I'm, harvesting lavender, anything like that. My brain's going glimmer, 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 glimmer.
Mhm.
So I think if we notice,
Yeah.
realize that perhaps they drive to work or maybe they walk to work and there's a park where they can
Mhm.
notice flowers,
Mhm.
or it might be a bird singing.
Mhm.
And maybe all of this in time will allow this individual
Yeah.
perhaps
Yeah.
to even eventually seek a different work environment.
Mm. Yeah, well, that is the other thing. It's when we look around and we can feel all the cues of danger that are coming at us all the time, from people, from environment, then we begin to assess what what is my system needing in this moment? What is it saying this would help, right? And sometimes it is, can I get out of this environment? Can I find a different job? And we can look at, this listener might be able to look at her boss and see that person is very dysregulated. That person is not in a state of regulation, likely because of the behaviors they are using, right? So, we begin to see through the lens of the nervous system, and it takes some of the story away, and we can see the state instead, and that often helps as well.
Absolutely. And I know we're somewhat oversimplifying it for our listener, but there are a lot of truth here that if you're in a negative environment, whether it's work relationship, romantic relationship, a friendship, family environment, whatever it is, if you're in a state of collapse, you're likely just going to keep taking it, taking it, taking it.
Right. Yeah.
Yes.
No, I was just you were saying that in a collapse, and remembering that you're not choosing that. Your biology is choosing it in service of your safety.
Absolutely. These are not choices.
Right.
This is not prefrontal cortex making choices for us at all.
Right.
And so
Right.
realizing that the power of glimmers is in being able, I almost see them as like breathing fresh life, air,
Yeah.
oxygen, so that you can, if you're feeling immobilized, I've been there.
Yep.
Right? I've been in that place where it's just like, oh, how can I do one more day? I mean, how can I even get?
Yeah.
And when you
Yes.
have glimmers, whether
Yeah.
they're people in your life or a purpose, something
Mm.
that allows you then, and I love
Yeah.
how you really focused on anger and anxiety can be well used to mobilize us.
Absolutely.
It's not about using anger to harm anyone or anxiety to, harm yourself, but realizing, wait, this means my blood's coursing in my veins and
Hmm.
I can use this energy. I'm just imagining
Mm.
for the listener
Yeah.
saying, I'm not appreciated here. So I'm going to get a little bit angry about this. And I'm
Yeah.
going to channel that sense of being angry into finding a different job.
Hmm.
Now, they
Yeah.
might not get there very
Hmm.
quickly,
Hmm.
but using the power of glimmers to
Yeah.
create some hope,
Yeah.
some resilience. And I can see this individual getting to a stage where they can then channel it into, like, wait, I'm not going to let it hold me back. I'm going to let it push me forward.
Yeah.
As
Yeah.
somebody who's a hard worker and a dedicated employee,
Hmm.
a lot of appreciative bosses out there.
Absolutely. Yeah, and and I often, or I sometimes think it sounds naive to think about glimmers changing, things as intense as the listener's question, right? And yet, we know from the science that a glimmer comes in and you feel it, and it's not one and done. Another one comes in and another, and they begin to accumulate, and they actually begin to give you more access to ventral. They change the shape of your nervous system so that you have more access to ventral. So even though it may feel to this listener and to other people out there that this is ridiculous, one little glimmer is not going to, change my life. It's not one little glimmer. It's glimmer after glimmer after glimmer, and it's the tiny micro moments that join together and change your biology. And that, I think, is the power and the promise of glimmers.
So beautifully said. And listeners, if you're still doubting, think of a time where you were sad, forlorn, woebegone, anything, and somebody smiled at you, or somebody hugged you, or you're kind of upset with your partner or somebody in your family, and they come in and they say, I'm sorry, and give you a kiss. Those are all glimmers. And those have the power to change your day, the situation, your
Yeah.
energy. And we can see by having a practice of glimmers, noticing them, harnessing them, embracing them, absolutely changes. It creates more joy.
Yes. Yeah.
Doesn't, you wisely say, does not eliminate life's suffering, does not eliminate the challenges, but it does make us better able to withstand them.
Yes. Exactly. Exactly.
You are amazing, and I am just so blessed that we had you with us today. Listeners, hold it up one more time. The Glimmers Journal by Deb Dana. You will find a link to it in the show notes. And she's just such a wonderful human being and has given so much to the field of psychology and trauma in particular and complex trauma. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Where can our listeners find you, Deb?
My website is where they can find me, and please come visit rhythmofregulation.com. And we're just putting up a Glimmers page. I'm going to invite people to share their glimmers, this dream of creating a global glimmer community where everybody can kind of enjoy each other's glimmers. So come and explore with us.
Well, thank you. And thank you for being a giant-sized glimmer in my day today. I'm so
Thank you.
grateful. And thank you, listeners, for joining us and for being a glimmer in my life. And this is Imperfect Love.
Thanks so much for sharing your time with me today. Remember, you have the power to transform your life and love fearlessly, if imperfectly, and it's my privilege to help you along the way. You can find more life-changing content, including my books and other podcast episodes, at drcarlamanley.com. Feel free to submit your own confidential questions through my website. I'll do my very best to include your issue on a future episode. If you found this podcast helpful, please subscribe and leave a review. Until we connect again, this is Dr. Carla Marie Manley wishing you oceans of blessings and love. Please note, this podcast is psychoeducational in nature and is not intended to replace formal mental health support. Please contact your healthcare provider or emergency hotline if you need psychiatric care. And as always, please take good care of your amazing, wonderful self.